Ayin Beis. We're in the process of reviewing chapters 69 and 70 in comparison to one of the key sources of these chapters, and that is haTefilah. In the book called Shaarei Teshuvah from the Mittler Rebbe, there's a haTefilah, not to be confused with the haTefilah in Derech Chaim. So there's a haTefilah, Gate of Prayer, chapters 7 and on, 7, 8, 9, 10, which all explain Boruch Sha'amar and Psukkah de Zimra. And we learned the first chapter 7 and compared it to chapter 69 in Ayin Beis. And the key comparison, the key point is the following: that the Rebbe Rashab's context, just to put things back in context, is to understand the impact of the transcendent forces of the Makiv, the Sevav, on our existence. And as such, he was discussing the impact on the different levels. And before getting into the details of the impact of the Keser of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, the crown, the desire of those worlds, he went back to explain in more detail the levels that we're discussing here. Basically, the process, all the way from Ein Sof, before there's any desire, before, not in time, conceptually, from the perspective of the divine, as a desire, before a desire arises, and then the desire starts taking shape, and how that creates existence. So that will lead us, obviously, into the specific levels of that desire. So far, what have we covered in Ayin Beis? In Beis, we've covered the Keser and the Makif of haTefilah, which is the infinite divine light before the Tzimtzum, the Igul HaGadol, the great sphere. We've discussed the impact of Tehira Tata, the Makif of Adam Kadman, which is the Ratzon Klali, a second Ratzon Klali, but now after the Tzimtzum, a general desire that encompasses in one snapshot, in one picture, the entire existence. That's Adam Kadman. We've discussed what I just said now is chapters 60 and 61 was Adam Kadman, 62 was the impact of haTefilah, if I recall correctly. Right, and then moved over to now going into the specifics of Keser Vatzilas, the effect of the desire, the Makif of Vatzilas, was chapter 67. Okay. 68 was a summary of everything before, and 69 and 70, which we're learning now, process of learning and finished learning, is the discussion, and now he's adding also how it fits into the prayer, into the Tefillah, Baruch Sha'amar, and the end of, that's the beginning of Psukkah de Zimra, and the conclusion, Birchas HaYetzer, which we say before Shema, the Rachem Aleinu, that the Kei Elam, Barachmech Haram, Rachem Aleinu, Adenu Zenu, Tzum Mizgavenu, all those levels are going to refer to the specific worlds of Bria, Atzilas, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. But to go there, he went back to the source. So briefly, and this is what we also learned in Shaarei Teshuvah from the Mittler Rebbe. Briefly, when he says Baruch Sha'amar v'hoye ha'elam, is referring to the first awakening, the first stimulation of a general desire for existence. So Baruch Sha'amar, like he says in the Mittler Rebbe's words, you cannot say he's saying this Amira is because just like this is the Amshach from Mehela Matzmus Elovi L'Bchinas Amira Batzmus. This is from the concealment where so-called the essence of the divine, nothing has yet expressed itself. So the first expression, Amira, is the first level. But he says that Amira, he says, you can't call it actual speaking, because you're not talking about any existence yet. You're talking all within the essence. You don't even have 10 spheres that have yet emanated. We read of B'chinas Hadin. I noticed that in another manuscript it should say B'chinas Hadibur, because din seems like a little out of place here. You could say din is Malchus and din is Tzimtzum, but elsewhere it says B'chinas Hadibur, which of course Dibur and Amira. But there's also connected to din, because concealing the infinite light and allowing to speak requires a din. But Okay, Mechinas Malchus Datzilus. That's a Malchus Datzilus. So how could you say when you say Baruch Sha'amar v'hoya elam? That's why he says. And okay, Baruch. Now you could say, okay, well, this Amira is still not creating; it's not actual creation; it's only speaking. It says Gam Amira zu b'machshava v'rotzen, like he said in Ayin Beis, that Amira is belev. So you can also say Ayin Beis is actually explaining what he means here. Machshava v'rotzen means belev. It's not actual dibur yet. Like later, Baruch Geizer Mekayim in Baruch Shamar later will say Geizer Mekayim, he decrees with words. So here's b'melev. So Gari Gam Rosna Hatzadan Lo Yehoya. So that's why Yeshlema, that's why we can say that the meaning of Sha'amar v'hoya elam, it means that in the Helam Ha'atzmos, where everything is still concealed, or in the words of the Ayin Beis in chapter 69, in Ein Sof, which is seamless, not Rotzen. Remember, we spoke not like the Rameh of Pana who says that Ein Sof, when we talk about Ein Sof, there's a level that's outside of Atzmos, he calls it Keser, or Rotzen, desire. Here we're talking about Ein Sof that's higher than desire, higher than any name or description. In that Ein Sof should arouse a desire, that's Baruch Sha'amar v'hoya elam. And what he says here in the Hagah, in the haTefilah, in the gloss, in the Rebbe Rashab elaborates on, that this is the same thing. We would say Bereish Manusa de Malka, in the beginning, the permission and the desire of the king, which implies that there was a state before that. Like he says in Eitz Chaim, Torah Mishanatzola, before anything emanated. So we have then Ola B'Ritzeinei. Okay. Or as he says a little later, Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, he envisions and he allocates within himself and estimates what will come out in the future. It's apparent from the Hagah, from the Mittler Rebbe, that Asid also is the word V'hoya. Like he says, Baruch Shamar V'hoya, the future. It looks like that's what he means. So that adds also that element, V'hoya. The future. Future meaning, of course, not in time, but he's envisioning what will come. So that's Baruch Shamar V'hoya. It's referring to this, as the words here, like it says, Bereish Manusa de Malka, that is the Baruch Shamar V'hoya. So he says, and that desire itself was concealed, even higher than a level of Ratzon. So therefore you need to have some type of tzimtzum batzmusi, the way he calls it, is that it should come out revealed from what was concealed. In Ayin Beis, the language is that there should be some type of Ratzon. But as we'll soon see, this is not the Ayin Beis language. It's not even a gili la'atzmi yet. That will be Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu is going to be that he sees it and senses it himself. This is just that something has moved into the level of Ratzon. The next chapter is going to say that's not even revealed to himself. And in Shaarei Teshuvah, he didn't say that yet. We'll soon see what he says in the next chapter. Anyway, and then the end of this chapter 7 in Shaarei Teshuvah, which is similar to which is actually cited actual language in chapter 69, is the two meanings in V'hoya. Does it mean Asid, on the future, and the Rebbe Rashab explains it at length in a parenthesis here, or does it mean V'hoya Shemiyad, immediately it brings into being the desire that engraved Golav Galifa B'Tihiri Allah, which he said he'll explain later, the Rebbe Rashab. So now, we learned then in chapter 70 in Ayin Beis, the next thing was the discussion of, okay, so that's the first step. So now we understand Baruch Sha'amar V'hoya Elam. But now comes Baruch Hu. What does Baruch Hu add? That Baruch Sha'amar V'hoya Elam is all within, it's not the level of Ein Sof, but it's still a Ratzon, as he says. It encompasses all the details. But it's a Ratzon Klali that in general is not even yet revealed to himself. When I say not revealed to himself, obviously God knows everything, but we're talking about in some type of conscious way that he can at least speak about it in terms of some type of revelation. So what's the revelation himself? That's Boruch Hu. Boruch Hu, I'm reading now from Ayin Beis, Sham Shachas HaHelam, Malagilu Ha'enu Shezeh Shayach Sheyesh Behelam Ba'Ratzon Yovili Degilu La'atzmei. And that's now the Hashara B'Koyach. So the Ratzon that we spoke about before, the desire, is a desire for existence. Before that, there's no such desire. Now that desire has now shaped something, relatively speaking. We're not talking about shape because it's still all before the tzimtzum. But this is Hashara B'Koyach. This is where they actually have the chikik, as he calls it, the engraving. Then he continues in chapter 7 and says 3 more levels that come now afterwards. That's all before the tzimtzum. Then comes Boruch Eimer V'Oiseh is Adam Kadman. Then Boruch Geizer V'Kayam is Yitzirah D'Klolos. Adam Kadman is Bria D'Klolos, Yitzirah D'Klolos. And Boruch Oiseh Bereshis is Atzilus D'Klolos, Reishis and Chachma. That's a summary of chapter 70. Now we're going to look at Shaarei Teshuvah and see how he explains this, which is, as I said, the source for what it says here. And we shall see that there's some differences. But it's excellent for contrast because you really get a sense. Because so far, more or less, the Ayin Beis really explains the Shaarei Teshuvah, and we get those first two levels. The first level, actually, I should say. The first one level. Okay. We continue now, Shai. You have any questions? Huh? Okay. So now chapter 8 in Shaarei Teshuvah from the Mittler Rebbe. It's, if you're looking inside the book, it's page 26b. Again, this is the sefer called Shaarei Teshuvah. When we say Derech Chaim, which is another sefer from the Mittler Rebbe, is often referred to as Cheli Gimel of Shaarei Teshuvah. So anyway, Shaarei Teshuvah, which is Mittler Rebbe, published in his lifetime. Right. So, he says now, chapter 8. Very similar to how the beginning of chapter 70 begins. Chapter 70 in Ayin Beis begins, because he's setting the stage to take from the Ratzon, to bring to Boruch Hu, to bring it into Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, into a distinct structure in his mind still. Just to make this a little more palatable, think of the artist. There's the state of the artist that he's just a field of energy. Then the artist has determined that he wants to create art, but it doesn't say what kind of art. Even to himself, he doesn't yet know. He just knows that he has a desire to create art. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, the goal is going to be the end process, so he knows what he wants. But we're talking about God wants it, and as we keep saying, in a structured way that we should be able to trace the steps. So one step at a time. The first step in the process is just a general desire. The second step is Boruch Hu, as he says, because the first step is just kol hapratim. So similar, compare that to the first line here in chapter 8. Exactly like he says here. The Amira Achaz Bolvad. I'm just comparing the two. We say Omar. It doesn't say 10 Mamoras, 10 Mamoras. It says Omar. Kamishakos of Loshen. Sha'omar. Baruch Sha'omar. Amira Achas Lavad. One utterance. One statement, so to speak. The Nechlek Laharbi Mamoris. And this divides into many different utterances. As we see, in actuality, this is not going to remain one utterance. We're going to have, as we know, Asar Mamoras, Yehira Kia. So and we see practically, we see a world that is filled with details. So once there's going to be Kishahaya Elam Befrat, there's going to be many. So what's the Maimer Echad? She says, Rak Shebat Musei Hu Akol Klulim B'Maimer Echad Levad. Because Natzmusei. Here he means Atzmusay, meaning the Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum. And that state, it's still all encompassed in one mimer. Ukeshetzorich, Lovid, the B'chinas Gili Gomer, and when it needs, and when it necessitates to come into a full, complete revelation, Nikir Oz is Chalkus HaMaimer HaKlol, the Proti Protis, Dafka. That's when it becomes distinguishable and distinct, the divisions, the differentiation of the general mimer, of the all-encompassing macrocosmic mimer utterance, into detailed details. Umeir HaKlal B'frat, and the klal then radiates and illuminates into the details. Ve'ein HaPrat Nichla B'chlal. What he means here is saying that the detail is encompassed in the klal, but it's completely in a state of concealment, because there it's all included in that one mimer. So if you look at it, you see one mimer, you hear one mimer, you don't yet see distinctions of all the levels. Okay. But Yuvan Zadarach Moshel, and we'll understand this like an example. See, here he's elaborating more than he does in Ayin Beis on these two states. One where is the Maimer Echad, the Klal, and then how it comes into Pratim. So he gives an example. When a person is still thinking inside himself, that there's a desire, a general desire, livnei's binyan, to build a structure, to build a home, to build a structure. Actually, binyan is not home, bayis is binyan. Ein zedak klolos in haratzon livnis. All it is a general desire to build. V'loy nikra dayin prati chelkov, and it's not yet distinct the details of the structure, the details of its parts. Eichu ma livnis, how and what he's going to build. Ume'ezet tam. And for what meiz time, for which reason? And in what method, in what form? So all he has is his general desire, doesn't have this breakdown. Hagam shebavad yesh behelam kol pratim eila b'cholos ratzon. It's interesting to compare the two languages. Here is, the Ayin Beis is much more succinct. So even though that Behelim concealed all these details are Yesh Behelim Kol Pratei B'chol Ratzon Zeh Shabbat Musay, that all these details are concealed, are definitely in a state of concealment within the general desire, within the atzmus, within the essence of the desirer, the person who's desiring, or in this case the Ein Sof. V'loi Neidu Niglu boy. No, I'm sorry. V'loi Neidu v'Niglu, but they're not known and they're not revealed. So in Ayin Beis, he's saying that means he's not even known to himself, because he didn't say that language here, but it's apparent that's what he means. Because they're united and they're all encompassed in that general concealment of the ratzon, of the desire, as if they're not yet in existence. But however, when the time comes, when you have to bring into action this desire, miyad ba ha'aris eratzon hakloli hazeh leprati chalkov. Immediately, this radiance, the illumination of this energy of the desire, the general desire, comes into the detailed prati chalkov, the details of the sections. Eichu ma livnes, how and what should be built, ume'ezet tam, whatever reason, and for what reason, ube'ezet efen. Me'ezet tam, he doesn't mean reason, he probably means what taste. Me'ezet tam, like, what particular taste this structure should be like, this room and so on. Ube'ezet efen, and what form, how it should be done. Eichu ma livnes, how and what? Be'ez tam, from what reason? Be'ez efen, and what way it will manifest. Umeir haklal b'chol prat. And the klal is not detached. Now that the details are coming out, they're all being informed by the klal. Lahavis. Umeir klal b'chol prat, lahavis. Liyas, I'm sorry. Liyas shetzarech lovi l'dei ma'aser b'peil mamish. Because since it has to come into action, actual actuality, what's coming into actuality? There's no disconnect here, like something, like there's a desire in one place and the actuality is a completely different one. What's happening now, the same desire which was concealed before is now manifesting an actualization to radiate in the details. So the details ain't b'chlal, you say everything that's in the prat, everything in the prat is there before in the klal, except you can't say within the klal you see the prat. It's similar to what we learned earlier, if you remember in Ayin Beis, we learned that Ratzon, the way Ratzon works, is who tough is bay, ain't called over tough is bay. Nothing can grasp it, but it grasps everything. Ratzon controls the entire body, but none of it controls the desire, meaning it's not a reciprocal relationship. So the Ratzon is the driving force. The paradox here is that while it's Ratzon concealed, there are no details. But the details are all coming out from that Ratzon. Take away that Ratzon and all the details stop as well. So that's what he's saying here. So what informs the details is the general Ratzon. And without it, it's impossible to bring it into mice, into action. The next page. So now we move to the next page on page chapter 52 or Tzchavov Gimel. That's the mashal he gave. So he gave now a mashal of what is being discussed in Ayin Beis, the moving from the Ratzon Kloli, what he calls the Ratzon, to the Pratim. What the Rebbe Rashab calls Gili La'atzmei, not Gili La'atzmei, only a Gili, but not Gili La'atzmei. Right. And then the Gili La'atzmei, which is going to be the Boruch, or the Shir Atzmei B'Koyach. That's the Ayin Beis. Now he continues the Mittler Rebbe, and now he's going to go back to the Nimshal. He says, V'kach Yuvan L'mayla, same is understood above, K'sha'ol L'britzayne HaPashat, B'chlal, Ba'atzmu Seidin Sof. When it arose in this simple desire in general, Atzmu Seidin Sof, that's Erein Sof. She'yia Heilam B'chlal, that the world should be exist in general, like, the artist wants the world, desires it. All the details of existence are included in there, concealed. And when it needs to come into action, when does it come into action? It's after the tzimtzum. That state is called, after the tzimtzum, called mokim pani, an empty space for cholol, and a hole. That's when it comes into action. Right now, it's not yet action. But in order for it to come into action, it needs to now, he's going to speak, Shemeir min ha'elam atzmusi legili gomor. So it needs to come into action, which is after the tzimtzum, that it should radiate from the concealed, hidden desire within the etzem. Should come the gili gomor, should come to total revelation, shezol b'chin is gili, l'mashashir ba'atzmei b'kayach. So here he says, Kanal, that this is the Gilui into what is called Shir Atzmei B'Kayach, where he allocated or visioned and estimated within himself the structure of existence. So when this takes place, in other words, so everything began first the desire, everything was concealed. It concealed all the details. And now, when it needs to come into action, which is after the Tzimtzum, and this Gilui is called Shir Atzmei B'Kayach, he says, Behechach Sheyeir you have to say that the energy from the general desire, which was originally concealed, radiates out into the details. Boruch Eimer V'Esa. And this is the meaning of Boruch Eimer V'Esa. So right there you see, is now diverged from what it said in Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis said this is Boruch Hu. And here he says Boruch Eimer V'Esa. Like skipping a step. But as we shall soon see, he goes about it a little differently. And he's going to say that before Boruch Eimer V'Esa, there's a mamutza between the two, and that's Boruch Hu. So right now, if you didn't learn Ayin Beis and just read this, how would we interpret it? Okay. Baruch Asher Amar V'Hoya Olam is the Ratzon Klali when everything is still concealed. And now, when it needs to come into action after the Tzimtzum, so the Ratzon Klal, this is Baruch Eimer V'Esa. What does that mean? That the Eimer, the one that said Baruch Sha'amar V'Hoya Olam, is now informing the details in the word Esa. Baruch Blessed is the one that says and does and creates. Shemebchinas Amida Klolis, which means that from the general utterance, Yeir B'Maisa. That's the definition of Baruch Eimer V'Esa. That Baruch Eimer is referring to the same Eimer of Baruch Sha'amar. So Baruch Sha'amar V'Hoya Olam, which there was all concealed, is now that Eimer is now informing V'Esa. It's coming into Esa. The Maisa Derech Prat V'Loi Kamoy Ba'atzmus, not the way it was before in the essence. Shaloi Hoya HaMaisa Nivdal Ma'aklal. There, the Maisa was not separate from the Klal. It was all encompassed. The Amira, the Klal Amira, I'm sorry. It was not separate from the general Amira. It was all included within it. One minute. So like he said before, that now when it comes out, and now the prat, once it comes out, is not encompassed in the klal as it was encompassed in the concealment, where it's all concealed. So that's what Baruch Eimer V'Esa adds. Because you want to have, remember, he said the expression, what did he say? Amira zu, sheyeh nivdal matzmusei. In the previous chapter in Shaarei Teshuvah, he said, what is the Amira? The same language Ayin Beis cites, is that there should be and something nivdal matzmusei. Now we understand the emphasis of that, because as long as it's a desire, it's not nivdal. So here you have a beautiful depiction of the interface. Because again, you could always ask the question, why do we need all these levels? God desires and it creates. Or God desires and right away there's details. Because you want to have both things. If there was too big of a jump, you could not have that something should be both separate and should be able to reconnect to its source. If the artist just desired immediately from desire right away details picture, you never can connect back to the essence of the artist. So you want to have two things here. On one hand, for it to be nivdal, separate, it has to be outside of the intensity of the unifying and all-encompassing desire. And then, there's the level that it can reconnect. But on the other hand, it's being informed by that state. So you have something where basically all of existence is encompassed in the source, even all its details, but in its source, it's not in reality as we know it, as a separate entity which will emerge after the tzimtzum. So for it to be a separate entity, emerge after the tzimtzum, you need to have step 2. And step 2 is that it comes into Baruch Eimer V'Esa, as he says here. Now, and in truth, it's not really contradictory, because you could say Baruch Eimer V'Esa is talking after the tzimtzum, which he calls in Ayin Beis Ak. But right now, and Baruch Hu is the in-between place, the Shir Atzmi. Right now, in the language of the Mittler Rebbe, it's hard to distinguish this, because he says right away, he says, is the Begili is Lamasha Shir Batzme Bekeach, and then he goes right over and he's speaking after the Tzimtzum. So it's not clear, is he talking after the Tzimtzum, before the Tzimtzum? But bottom line, it's clear, one thing is for sure clear, that a Ratzon Klali which was concealed has now is now manifesting and informing a Rotzen Prati, which is Nivdal, not united all within that source. Okay. And that's why in the first stage we only say Boruch She'amar Levad. Blessed is the one that's stated, that's said. Why? And it doesn't mention Maisa, as opposed to the Boruch Eimer V'Oisa. And afterwards it has to come into revelation. The klal emerges, yotza. You can say it exits actually. Yotza goes out, meaning it extends outward. Lahoyer befrat, to radiate, illuminate the detail. Okay, so we have here the two Baruch Shama Vaya Omar. That Omar then is Emer Va'isa into the details. It's not clear exactly where that level is here. In Ayin Beis, it's clear that Baruch Emer Va'isa is after a Tzimtzum, and Baruch Hu, the in between, is before, but he didn't say that yet here in Shaarei Teshuvah. Then he continues and says like this. Omavad Inyan Klal Prat Yuvan Oid, besides this Klal Prat that he just described. In other words, in Baruch She'amar V'Hayelim, it's a Klal. It's all encompassed in a very general sense. Everything's there, but it's all concealed. Then the Prat, he's saying now another thing. Yuvan Oid. We also understand something else. It's an additional point he makes here. Shegam Kipshute. That even Kipshute, in a literal sense, b'bchinas ha'maisa b'chlal, gamkein hine yesh rotzen hanelam ba'atzmus. That in this in b'bchinas ha'maisa b'chlal, gamkein hine yesh rotzen that in the general maisa you also have this concealed desire. That's not shebilti boli de maisa klal. Sorry, I have to read this again. 1 second, let me see how we read this. Umavadi in klal prat yuvan age gam kipshute b'chinas ha'maisa b'chlal gam ken yeshos hanelam ba'atzmus klal. Okay. He's going to say basically like this. He's adding something that is alluded to earlier. Remember we discussed the difference between the Heskem spoke about the difference between the Heskem, the two levels of Ratzon, of Keser, of Ak and Keser of Atzilus. So remember he said so he said that it could come after Shaka V'Tarya, where there's a back and forth discussion before he comes to actually determining that's what he desires. That's a determination. He's alluding to this here too. I'm not sure if it's connected to that, because that was Ak. But let's see where he's going here. What he's saying is like this: that in addition to what we just said, Klal and Prat, and that the Klal, the Rotzen that's concealed, informs the details, there's something that is not yet defined in the Rotzen. So right now, till now, we can say like this: the Rotzen has a desire, it's concealed. For it to become revealed, you need to have step 2, which is Baruch Eimer V'Oisa, to connect it to the actions, the details. But the only distinction you can say is one is completely concealed, one is revealed. He's saying no, there's another distinction. And that distinction is that the desire can still change. And in Asiya, it's finalized. That's what he's saying. Okay. He's going to say this now. I'm going to read it. He says, Umavad inyan klal prat yuvan oid. Shegam kipshute. Like we see also literally, what can happen? In the action in general, within it, of course, is the concealed desire, that's atmos, that does not come into action at all. In other words, there's something that's removed. And it only remains in a state of desire itself. And when the thing comes under question, if he should actualize this desire, he can still come to change things. However, once, in order for there not to be any change, and the Ratzon desire should be transmit in order to come into action, that's the inyan of Eimer V'Eisa. He says, and he does. Okay. So, I mean, the language needs to be clarified. But because he already had the Omer Ba'atzme. He had within himself, he already had the desire. But there was just a desire. And he needs to requires to have a concealment, a second step, a second transmission. Not just that he generally desires it. That the Ratzon should now want the action. In other words, what he's saying here, what appears to me he's saying at least, is that there's almost two desires here. One is that in Ein Sof, which was completely beyond it all, arose a desire, Bereisha Menusa de Malka arose a desire for existence. That desire is concealed. All the details going there. Then comes, they become revealed after the Tzimtzum, as he said, Baruch Eimer V'Eisa. But he says something else now. That desire in its own, just leaving it on its own, before it comes into action, can still go through a change. A change, I don't know if he means a change in the structure, to be a different structure. It could be a change that the desire won't come into action. In other words, you could leave something in a state of desire, like an artist, and then he doesn't follow up. So now he's saying, so he needs a second desire, a second stage, that actually takes that initial desire, and that's Omer V'Eisa, like Ratzon Levav, so at least Tzimtzum Shach Shenis, Ratzon L'Maisa, Hainu Baruch Eimer V'Eisa. It's a little more emphasis on explaining, in other words, the process, how it goes from the states of Ratzon to the next state of actuality. Huh? Yeah. The Shinui is not clear what he means by Shinui, but clearly he means it's not, in other words, it's not some definite thing. It's not just an inevitability that the Ratzon is just going to go into Gilui Pratim. There is, no, because you could argue, I'll tell you why. You could say, Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam V'Eisa. Why do you need another Baruch Eimer V'Eisa? You could say, blessed is the one that said there should be a world. Okay, that's Ratzon. And V'Eisa, and then comes a world. Is apparently, this explains Baruch Eimer V'Eisa, that you need another Baruch. You need another Hamshacha. Right, you need another Hamshacha. In other words, because again, God can do anything He wants, but we're talking about in the way He's doing it in an orderly way. The artist can desire art, and then he could get distracted, or it may not come out right away, or whatever it may be. So that's why you need another, that's what he means by Shin, that's why you need Baruch Eimer V'Eisa, another, that Eimer, a Baruch Sha'amar, it's still that Eimer, but another Hamshacha that's telling it to become an Eisa.
It's conceivable if we can come out.
What does that mean? Everything's conceivable. Remember, we're talking here the way God wants it structured. Yes, it's conceivable. Not conceivable that it won't come out. It means there's a state where it's not yet bound with existence. That's what it really means. It's not bound to existence yet. No, Ashak V'Tari, I think, what compared to what he said before, well, I told you, Tzemach Tzedek said Ashak V'Tari is like he asks Chesed and Emes, should he create, should he not create? We have in Medrash, where God asks Emes, and Emes says, don't create, and Chesed says, yes, create. Obviously, so why is he asking? He's going to create anyway. But the same question is in Chumash. It says at the end of Parashat Bereshis that he regretted creating existence. And Mikra bored them up. So Rashi explains, it's not regretting. We're talking here, if he regretted, he shouldn't have created it. It's part of the process. God binds himself to a structure. The regretting is that it's not being fulfilled the way I want it to be fulfilled. Here too, there's a stage where we need to know that existence is not a necessity on its own. It's a desired by God. That's the thing. So it's just like he's not bound by it. It's not like he must, because he had desire, he must. There's no must. It also helps us relate to that dimension. In other words, is we can then say, you know what? Once God desired existence, he can't do without us, or our existence is as important as he is. No, there's always, you want to be able to always connect to the air that is the divine itself. At the same time, you want existence. I mean, that's the bottom line. The whole all these steps would altogether not be necessary. God doesn't need to explain to us how he creates. He could just, here, we popped into existence, and that's it. And then what's the problem? God created us. He wants us to be able to retrace the steps. So therefore, these are the steps of how you so-called have a relationship. Like we talked about mitzvahs. When you have a kavanah, the mitzvah is a kavanah pratis. You're doing tefillin. You're doing mezuzah. Kashrus. And then there's the kavanah klalis. The ratzon elyon. So you can say, 1 second. What do we need the pratim when you have the klalim? And what do we need the klal if you have the pratim? The answer is you want both. You want on our terms, you want the desire as it manifests in our lives. So there are distinctions. But then there's the state of desire that is not bound yet to those distinctions. That's what he's saying here. And that state, hypothetically, yes, could be a different way. It's not about whether it's going to go another direction or not. The point is, it's not bound.
In other words,
it's not nitfus, as I...
There's an expression of reshus or ratzon, even after it's
everything is always, all these levels are there always, all the time. Or else you wouldn't, the whole Rosh Hashanah, when we ask for God to renew, you could say, hey, second, I do not think God's going to renew existence anyway.
Yeah. What I meant to say was that when reading Ayin Beis, it sounded like the reshus and ratzon only took place before the ratzon element.
There's no before and after. It's always, all the time.
It seems like, okay, but...
It doesn't seem like, not to me. Maybe it seemed to you. No. Because there's nothing, it's lamayla mizman.
Right, no, but what I'm saying, once you got the ball rolling with the ratzon, it sounded like then it was a set deal. And here he's saying, no, reshus remains, that question still remains.
No, if you look at the end of chapter 69, he makes it very clear. As a matter of fact, even more than here.
The Yehovah's, talking about the Yehovah's.
Right, exactly.
But
that's all Bereshus B'Ratzon.
That sounded like it was only in the first stage, and here he seems to be saying
Well, 1 second.
Here he's saying that even after Brachos Omer Osev, that why we have the Omer Osev, because we still have the Reshus, you can still change his mind at that point.
To me, both of them are the same. I don't see the difference.
So you think
as a matter of fact, it's exactly the same level. What he's saying here, there could be shinui, is basically Zrotzen. He's saying here what he calls Yecholos.
I thought Yecholos is my knowledge, like an
Atzmi. No. He said this in the state of. He said, why is it Rishus? You say, Bereish Romanusa de Malka. So he said in the beginning, Betchilas Rishus and Verotzen. Yeah, but that's before. That's not Erein Sof. That's after Erein Sof. That's where the Rotzen.
That's his Pashtus after of the Etzma Or, but still Lifnei Tzimtzum.
No. There's also Lifnei Tzimtzum. Of course, he's talking here the level of the Rotzen, the first level. We're talking the first level is 100% before the Tzimtzum. The first level of Rotzen that he's speaking about here, Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Eilam, is before the Tzimtzum. It's the Rotzen with an Eir. And so here he says it's Rishus, and here he says it's Rishus. That's why you need Baruch Ha'imar V'Eisa, in order to bring that into a definitive action. That's what he said right now.
And that it could be Mishana Adain, that could be Shinui.
He doesn't say Mishana Adain. He says Shinui means it's a state where it's not Nasiya yet. That's why you need another Hapshacha, Baruch Ha'imar V'Eisa. Don't think in human terms. You think in human terms. I made my mind, then I changed my mind. We're not talking like that at all. That's not what we're discussing here. We're talking about God doesn't need anything. So he can pull the plug whenever he wants to pull the plug. There's no necessities altogether. So it's not about, it's about different levels of manifestation. That's how we have to understand it. So tzarich liyas tzimtzum v'hashachar sheini sarotzen lemaisa. V'hainu Boruch Eimer V'Eisa. Clearly, second Hamshacha, and that's Boruch Eimer V'Eisa. L'fizeh, I'm continuing learning chapter 8 here. You have it? Okay. Okay, so that's the additional. So we went from Klal to Prat, and now we moved, and like I said, he could have said Baruch Shamar V'Haya Elam V'Eisa, or Eimer V'Eisa, but he says Baruch Eimer V'Eisa. So second Hamshacha, which makes it definitive. Like when we speak about, we spoke earlier about that there's the level where there's Spheres Einketz. Okay? Hello? Spheres Einketz. And then there's a level Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, how he wants 10 hidden spheres. So, do you think the infinite spheres level has disappeared? Of course not. Right now, within the 10 spheres, there's a possibility for infinite spheres. Because it's all Agdus. Only thing is concealed. But from the perspective of Atzmus, like he said earlier, not from his perspective, but Erkai, when he looks at 10 spheres, he doesn't see 10 spheres, he sees infinite spheres. Or beyond infinite. However, at the same time, his power is also that he wants the Gvul. He wants the structure of 10. So, the point being is that that even though we see a world as we see it, yes, there's one dimension that we only see the limitation. There's another dimension from Havaya, there's also Elokim. Havaya also looks, when God looks, he also knows the structure he created. But if you go to another level within Elokus, there's a point where it becomes all equalized. To the point where it is as if it doesn't exist. Because it's just one thing, the Ayin and Yesh are all one. So you're really just talking about dimensions of reality, actually, within the reality that we see here. And you want to have it in levels. You don't want it to jump. You don't want Baruch Shamar V'Haya suddenly to become Oisa. You want that to be, that's the state that covers the general desire. Which, in essence, could be Shinri, means it doesn't have to be 10 spheres. It could be 11, it could be 1,000,000, it could be infinite. Then you have the state where it becomes now defined as 10, and not 11. 10 and not 9. That's the Shir Atzmei B'Koyach. But then there's the state, Baruch Eimer V'Eisa, that the Asiya now has so-called given a definition. It's definitive. Once Hashem says Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rakia, there's not an Amir Klolos anymore. So there's no, that's what means here, no Shin. This is now the definitive structure. That's the second Baruch Eimer V'Eisa that comes after the first one. You could even argue more, that even in the first Ratzon Klali, he also has definitive what he's going to do in the next stage. But there it's not defined yet.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah. But that's all the first level. That's the first level of Ratzon.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the Fizeh gam shamayse bechlal v'loy befrat adayin. Well, the Fizeh gam shamayse bechlal v'loy befrat adayin tzarich lo v'letzimtzum shachem mechadash. She's saying the Fizeh gam shamayse bechlal. According to this, even if the mice is there in a general form and not in detail, it has to come through a tzimtzum, and a new hamshacha, and a new transmission. Okay. In other words, according to what he said now, the additional element he's saying, that even if you want to say Baruch Sha'amar V'Hoya Elam includes Maisa, it's only in general, not in detail, and it still needs to come through a tzimtzum hamshacha, a new transmission, a new Baruch. V'koi hakol adayim b'chinas ha'atzmis tarim sheba l'dei gili gomer b'chinas kav v'chut. Now all this is still talking about how it's in the level of atzmis before it came to complete revelation in the kav v'chut, in the thread and ray of light that shines after the tzimtzum. Techainu gam b'mashashir ba'atzmei adayin. Meaning, it's still discussing in the level of still shir ba'atzmei adayin, that it's still in his envisioning, in his allocation, in his estimation. Shir zeh, this particular measurement, Hayalavi l'dei ma'isa v'lo sheyeh b'chinas rotzen b'atzmei levad. Dahainu gam masha shir b'atzmei dain shir zeh hayalavi l'dei ma'isa. That means that also in the level of where shir adain, where he's estimating within himself adain, and masha shir b'atzmei dain shir zeh. That also in the state where he's still estimating this. How you love it is in order to come into action, and it should not remain just a desire alone. See, this is where it gets a little confusing. Because seemingly, now he's going back to Shir Atzmei B'Koyach. In other words, he's suddenly saying that there is another stage. Baruch Eimer V'Oiseh, what is it referring to? Shir Atzmei B'Koyach? Or is it referring to what comes after the Tzimtzum? So let's read on. And I think this is where the Rebbe Rashab gives us a lot of clarity. Because the Rebbe Rashab, it's very clear. The Ratzon has all the details in it, but it's not revealed. Even to himself. Baruch Hu makes it revealed within himself. That's the Shir Atzmei B'Koyach. Then comes Baruch Eimer V'Oiseh. After the Tzimtzum, it comes into action. Here, the Mettler Rebbe went right to Baruch Eimer V'Oiseh. So, and then he goes back to Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, and we'll see now that this is, that when you read it on your own, you get confused. Where are we now?
So that's mathematical now.
So let's say so Baruch Eimer V'Oiseh, you could argue, is referring to now, no longer is it a general desire. You could say it's Shir Atzmei B'Koyach. Now he's defined the desire in 10 hidden spheres. So it's Baruch Eimer V'Oiseh. Seemingly it's Baruch Eimer V'Oiseh, because now it's no longer a Shinui, as he said, it's the second Hamshacha. The first Hamshacha was the general desire. Baruch Shamar V'Hayalel. The second one is Baruch Eimer V'Oiseh, Shir Atzmei B'Koyach. That's how you would hypothetically interpret this, without Ayin Beis. But let's continue and let's see where he's going, and then we can see, is there a difference between the two or not? Because here apparently he says it's all Fnei HaTzimtzum. But then he says like this, now, in order for there to be such a great jump, quantum leap, such a leap, Mehelam Atzmi Sutzeni HaPoshet, from the concealment of his essential desire, seamless desire. Kisha Amar V'Haya, Baruch Shamar V'Haya. A jump from Baruch Shamar V'Haya, Liyish Eimer V'Oiseh, to the big jump and leap, to come to say and do, which we just said is a big leap. Because you're now getting into Klal to Prat, one, and number, you're going into now definitive as opposed to a non-defined. So in order for it to be such a leap, there has to be between them a connecting interface. Back to interfaces. For who Mashakasa Baruch Hu. There we go. And this is what says Baruch Hu. Because remember, between Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam and Baruch Eimer V'Oiseh, there's a Baruch Hu. A third Baruch. So we have like this. Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam is the general desire. Now Baruch Hu is the Mamutza that he's saying, interface. And then comes Baruch Eimer V'Oiseh. So in order for it to be a jump between these two, you need this interface. Pirush, what's the meaning of Baruch Hu? He is blessed. Hu is Loshen Nister. It's not Baruch Ata. It's Hu. He. It's Loshen Nister. It's a concealed. It's a concealed term meaning who. Blessed is he. Not blessed is you. When you say you to someone, you're speaking to them face to face. Who? You're speaking in the third person. Vu helam atzmis harotzen. What's the nister? What's concealed? That's referring to that concealed essential desire, shenishir ba'atzmusei behelam, that remains concealed in the etzem, sheyumshach v'yovim in the helam legili. That's what it means Baruch Hu. The level of Hu that's concealed should now be revealed. From helam legili. Kedei sheyuchalis eimer v'eisa. In order for there to be step 3, the eimer v'eisa. This is all these bunnas. So what do we have? Baruch Shamar V'Haya Elam is that this desire emerges, but it's all concealed. And now we're asking for it to be revealed in order to come into Baruch Eimer V'Eisa, which is interesting. So you really have 3 Baruchs going on here. The first Baruch is taken from Ein Sof, the Etzem, where there's altogether no desire. The second, the Baruch Shamar V'Hayalem is the first one that takes it into a general desire. And then step 2 is you want to bring from that who, from that general hidden desire, it should be revealed.
In other words, first
in order for them to come third Boruch, Omer V'Eisa V'Haina Pirush Boruch Hu. That's the meaning of Boruch Hu, and then Omer V'Eisa. Can you give me the Siddur a second? One second. Boruch Hu. Boruch Shamar.
Created the state of Boruch Hu.
Well, hold on, 1 second. I want to make sure. I'm all confused now. We say it every day, but man alive. No, I'm right. I thought so, because he started not saying Boruch here. So he said Boruch Shamar Boruch Hu Boruch Emer V'Eisa. Okay, so there's a third Boruch for sure.
Yeah, that's fine.
No, later. I'm talking about these 3 right now.
What's your concern that there wasn't a Boruch?
No, because he was not saying. He doesn't say Boruch Emer V'Eisa. He just says Emer V'Eisa. What concerned me was, I'll tell you what's concerning me. I just want to see one language here. So Baruch Shamar V'Elam. Okay, that's what he says here clearly. If you look back in chapter 7, I was just distinguishing what happens by Baruch Shamar V'Elam. So he's saying, in order for there to be altogether a Ratzon, even a Ratzon that's concealed, lo b'chinas agilim min hahelem. K'shadodam peine b'atzmusi mamish lo b'chinas Ratzon pasha b'chlolus eize inyan davar mashu. Zeh rab b'chinas gili pratim b'chlolos helem atzmusei. Okay. Okay. So Baruch Shamar V'Elam takes from general Helem Atzmusei. Baruch Hu takes from the Helem of the Ratzon, not the Helem of the Eir itself. And Baruch Emer V'Eisa brings it into this definitive. Okay. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so far we can say it's consistent with Ayin Beis, and the contrary, Ayin Beis really explains it. See, Ayin Beis adds that Gili La'atzmei adds a tremendous element, which he doesn't say here, because the question really is, what's the difference between Baruch Hu and Baruch Shamar V'Elam? He says you need a mamutza, but what's really the difference? Why can't you just skip from Baruch Hu and say Baruch Shamar V'Elam? Okay, that's the hidden desire, and then from there Hamshacha into connecting it to the details. The Ayin Beis answers that, because the Baruch Shamar V'Elam is a ratzon that's not even revealed to himself. Baruch Hu adds a revelation to himself before you have the Oisa. Because what remains unclear here, what's this big jump? I mean, it's a big jump, I understand, but so that's a jump. Why do you need a third step? Why do you need the middle step here? Why not just jump from Baruch Shamar V'Elam to Baruch Emer V'Eisa? You're also saying another bracha. But the Gili La'atzmei, the Gili L'Zulis, that changes it a lot. That because Baruch Shamar V'Elam is a desire, but desire is completely concealed, like he says, Helam. For that to even have expression to him, first he needs Shir Atzmei B'Koyach to himself. Then you could have Baruch Emer V'Eisa, which is Ak in Ayin Beis. Here, no mention of Ak altogether, just for the record. But I'm saying, if you read this alone, you could argue all these 3 levels are before the Tzimtzum. You could argue that. Even though he does say that Oisa happens after the Tzimtzum. But okay, let's see here what goes on. Let's continue. Interesting, right? The comparison. You can see here how the Rebbe Rashab worked this through and brings it to a whole different level. That's what I wanted to really achieve here. You know, it's how would the Chassidim have learned the Mittler Rebbe before Ayin Beis? Okay. It's also important how to daven when you say Baruch Shamar. What are you supposed to be thinking about? Now you understand why some Chassidim never got beyond Baruch Shamar. They're busy figuring out, they can't figure out the levels. Baruch Hu, he could just sit there for right? Okay. V'hainu pirush Boruch hu v'ach immer ve'esa. See, he doesn't say Boruch immer. That's why I wanted to go back and check. I knew that it says. Now, interesting parentheses here that I realize. V'gam yisparish kol zeh, and also all this can be explained k'fi hamavur b'kavonos hasidr harizal. The way it's explained in the intention, in the kavonos of the sidr of Arizal, the Boruch Sha'amar hu b'chinas radla. The Boruch Sha'amar is the level of Reishad lo yisyada, that high level lo yisyada means it's not known. Or Boruch hu b'chinas chachmas temah da'arech hampin. That's chachmas temah. It's still stimah, but it's chachmas temah. K'mashikos mokamacha barichis, like it says elsewhere at length, v'day l'maven, and it's enough to understand it. So let me tell you what. I don't know if I'm a maven, but I'll tell you what it says there. And I see now what he's doing. Remember, began this whole thing. I said that earlier in chapter 23. Was it 23? Yeah. So he spoke the whole thing in Ak. He says the Amir of Ak, Baruch Shamar v'Hayala. Right? Chapter 23. In chapter 150, he says there's two interpretations. Here he's saying the parentheses that that this can also be explained. Basically, saying you can reconcile the two. Now I understand what means that's not Gili La'atzmi. Reishad Lo Yisyada means that it's not known not only to the level, also it's not only to lower levels, but also itself it doesn't know. So that's what he's saying here. Adla, that Baruch Shamar v'Hayala, like the Arizal says. That's explained in the Siddur. Remember, I said to you the Siddur is the discourses of the Alter Rebbe is brought in the Siddur. And then comes the second level, Baruch Hu is Arich Hampin. Then comes Galgalta, is Baruch Immer Ve'esa. So basically, you can speak the same thing, it's just in a different level. And I believe that Tzemach Tzedek on Siddur, when he explains Baruch Shamar in his Siddur, Ayrater on the Siddur, connects it also. He speaks about the Vahaya from the Shalah, how it's lifting at Simpson. I have to look it up. But I think that helps also create a bridge between these two interpretations. But that's what he adds here. Okay, let's continue. Boruch Gezer Mekayim. Okay, so now we've covered three things. According to the Ayin Beis, Baruch Shamar v'Hayala and Baruch Hu is the Ratzon, B'Reishon Menusa de Malka, Shir Atzmei B'Keyach, where he actually defined and engraved that it's revealed to himself. And then Baruch Emer Ve'es in Ayin Beis is Ak. Then he goes on that Yitzira Klolos and Asir Klolos is Gezer Mekayim and Oiseh Bereshis, which is Atzilus. Now he continues here and explains the next one. Baruch Gezer Mekayim, Baruch Oiseh Bereshis. Next two. What is Baruch Gezer Mekayim, Baruch Oiseh Bereshis? Pirush. So let's see how he goes here. Ki acha shabarot and shabatz musay. That after we finish those levels we just discussed, after the Rotz and Shabbatmus, the desire within the essence, which started with Baruch Sha'amar v'Haya Elam, went to Baruch Hu, and then went Baruch Emer v'Esa, Gam be'efen she'yovid leprat ha'mayis adayin, hu hakol rak b'bchinas gili min atzmusei belvad. Even the way it comes into details, now we're calling Emer v'Esa, it's still in a form of Gili of Atzmus alone. It's still possible for it not to actually be fulfilled, be sustained in Poel Mamish. I'm just comparing it. Remember, he said before, in Ayin Beis, he called that Ak. Ak is only a Heskim. It's not Shaykh das. Because the machshav v'rotzon adayin, and in the middle of belev, it's like when he spoke about the king. The king has not yet decreed; he's only stated it. So here's another level. Before we said about there could be a shinui, he's also saying here that not there could be a shinui again. It's not as manifest. So in other words, within the king, within the artist, now we have already revealed himself. Not only revealed, we also have now a defined desire that's connected to Asiyah. He's ready to act. But bottom line is, he's not painted yet. He's not begun the actual physical creation process. And if he would create from this level, like he said in Ayin Beis, it would be a completely different type of existence. What was the words he used? Dayan Lisa says, "In a muchach Dayan Lisa sabes samitzis b'mamish." That's what he says. An ak, it's only neshamas de gufus. It's not kalim yet. I'm just using the Ayin Beis to explain this. And now we need a fourth level of Boruch. We need another concealment and another transmission. That this ratzon, this desire that said, in order to create, before kamay, one second. It should come into a kiyum. That's going to be Gezer Mekayim. It should actually come into reality. Kamay kihu amar vayehi. Like when we say hu amar, he said vayehi, and it was v'chein v'hi chein. Like we say in the Chumash, it says vayem elikim yehi oyer, v'hi oyer, or v'hi chein later. What do you need v'hi chein, the second one? Because what's wrong with him just saying it? Because you want the saying to come into action. That's why you say, God said, and vayhi chein, and then it was such. It was so. That's adding the Gezer Mekayim. Al derech moshel kasher melech imiru megaler etzein elasid says a davar. The example he cites in Ayin Beis, I'm just looking at this similar. Like a king who decrees. I'm sorry, that he states, umegaler etzein. And reveals his desire, elasis ezudava, to perform some type of action. It's not necessary that it will be fulfilled immediately. Only to the point. Only when he has to decree and says, "I want this fulfilled. I decree so and so." Just that he has a desire for it does not create an order, a command. Okay. Leimer b'gzeiras dvar malchus. Only when he's a command. It's a bekim from leimer to say b'gzeiras dvar malchus, the decree of the word of the king, of the kingdom. L'kayim zeh haratzon Shaarei Teshuvah Shaar. The l'kayim, to fulfill this desire that he desired. So there's two steps here. He has a desire to decree. He may even discuss it, but then comes I decree. That's when it becomes action. Interesting additional step. In other words, it becomes even, it's not enough for the king to just say, I'm dreaming about it, or I desire it, and someone else. He has to bring it into a gzeira for it to really be real and fulfilled. Okay. V'hainu Gezer Mekayim. And this is when we say Gezer Mekayim, he decrees and it's fulfilled. Pirish b'shvila kiyum. So not Gezer Mekayim, Gezer Mekayim, you can interpret Gezer. He decrees and he fulfills. No, Gezer is in order for it to be fulfilled. Gezer, he decrees in order for it to be Mekayim, for it to be fulfilled. Because you could also interpret Gezer, he decrees, or Mekayim, and he fulfills. The meaning here is no, he decrees and therefore it's fulfilled. Pirush b'shvil hakiyum, v'zeh lo nikra b'shem amira. And this is not called the word speaking. Because the amir is only the desire. Ela b'shem gzeira v'tzivui. This is called with the name of decree and a command. Al eides hakiyum bilvad. It's focusing on the fulfillment alone, on kiyum itself. No, it's not just talking general desire with all the details. We're talking about here the focused decree on this kiyum, that I decree this particular thing should be fulfilled. L'kayim retzeineh, in order to fulfill his desire. In other words, this hamshacha he's adding is not just a general hamshacha; it's also specific to this particular element, the dal. Whatever it is that he wants. I mean, he's more applying himself to the detail here, not to the klal. It's not just, I desire in general. It's very, yeah. So that's why he says in Ayin Beis, that's the Keli. That's already Akudim. That's Yitzira de Klolos. It's not just Bria without shape and form. Here there's some type of shape. Va'achakach. One second, let me just see something. Okay. And then he says Baruch Eisa Bereshis Shehu B'chinas HaChochma Shenikra Reishis. This is the level of Chochma which is called Reishis. V'Eisa Bereshis, it means V'hainu Mashakulim B'Chochma Eisa Asa B'Chochma Davka. You create everything with Chochma. This is now the end of chapter 70, where he says, yeah, two priests. He's going to say it here too. Here I think it goes the other way. There he says first that the Chachma itself has to be created, and then he says with Chachma he creates. Here he began the other way. He says that the Reishis, that who begins Chachma shenikra Reishis. So Eisa Breish and Mashakulam b'Chachma Asa. B'Chachma Davka. Everything is made with Chachma. V'tzarich l'zeh b'chinas tzimtzum v'ashachma b'fnei atzmei. Here you need another Baruch. Eisa Breishis. It needs another tzimtzum and a transmission on its own. V'inyan who, what's the inyan of this is Kiyudua b'Piras Breishis b'Targemunkelis Ketargemunkelis b'Chuchmasa. As is known, the meaning of the Bereshis is, like he says here, he also brings that here at the end here, that it's b'chuchmasa. Bereshis means to create with wisdom, b'chuchmasa. Like it says, b'chuchma, with wisdom you shall build, even you build a house. V'chein Hashem b'chuchma yasad aretz. God with wisdom established earth. Now that is that, which means, like an example, a desire that comes into action to build a structure. Similarly, when he decrees and it's fulfilled to actually bring the building into action, to build in actuality, then specifically, once he wants that Gezer Makayim, he wants an actual creation, a structure, that's when he specifically needs to the Haskell, to meditate, to contemplate, and to understand, to plan. How and what way this structure should be built. And everything is according to a reason and a seichel and an intelligence, a design. David, like when David said in the way building of the Beis Hamikdash, Kiyad Hashem alai hiskil. Like God's hand over me caused me to conceive. Kiyad Hashem alai hiskil. In other words, it came with a God's plan, which is which conceived ideas within David, all according to God's plan. And according to this profound and qualitative be'echus in the depth, amukah, depth and profound reason, tam l'rotzen, reason for the desire, that's how the structure will be brought into action. This is the simple meaning of kulam b'chach masiyah, that everything is created b'chachma. And this is also so that's what kulam b'chach masiyah, because there's another interpretation that he's going to say in a moment. That's also the meaning of Eisa Bereshis Dafka. Not Eisa Bereshis, you create Bereshis, but you created Bereshis, Bichuchmasa, with Reshis. That's, like I said, is the second interpretation in Ayin Beis. Here's the first one. Like it says in Zer, Abba Omar, Chochma speaks, Mafkid li'ima and Mafkid and Mafkid and Mafkid a pocket and gives like a pakad. He gives it. Not transmits. He. And that's what's the opposite of acquire, of transferring over. Transfers to Ima. Shenikra Umna. Ima is called Umna, means the worker, the practitioner, the artisan, the craftsman. Al derech moshel, for example, hachochem shemitzave, umefakid kafi chachmosei le'uman, like a wise person who commands, umefakid, and orders. Gives a pekuda, is also from the word pekuda. Yeah, the Chochmah speaks and mafkid, also from the word pekuda, the orders. According to his wisdom, le'uman, to a worker, to a craftsman, she'yivne eifon ma'isa binyan, that he should build the way this building should be done. Like, yeah. And what it says, Eisa Bereshis, you could explain also, this is the second interpretation in Ayin Beis, the first one. Which is not bepashtus. Shachokma hanikra reishis. The chokma is called reishis. Gam hi bob b'chinas asiyah. That chokma, which is called reishis, also she comes in a form of asiyah. Kumeshikosav hachokma ma'ayin timotza. Shuzel ma'ayin liyesh. Like it says, chokma comes from ma'ayin. From where? Because chokma itself is the creation. And that's meaning Eisa Bereshis. Not that he creates with Bereshis, with Chochmah, but Eisa Lib Bereshis. He creates two Bereshis. Creates Bereshis itself from nothing. U'k'maimer is all the Bereshis. Now, Maimer, who, like it says, I'll say Bereshis is also an utterance. Being that it's a general utterance to all the details of the structure that emerge from it. So Bereshis is also a creation, also an Amira. Boruch Eisa Bereshis. Ve'ein lo yarech l'gabe b'chinas Amira de Rotzen Klali. He's just not qualifying. It's not, however, we said also before, the Rotzen is also Baruch Sha'amar v'haya elam, but there's infinite distance. It's not comparable to the Amira, to the speaking of the general desire before. Shahula Maila min hatam hachokma klal, because that one is higher altogether from reason and wisdom. And it's also the general source for all the detailed actions. Meaning to all the details, meaning not just the details of the Maisa, but the details of the desires for the Maisa. One word here. And just was an epiphany. You see what he's saying here? They're going to be the foundation of the makifim. Remember, he's not talking pnimim here. You could say all this is pnimi. He says it's this root for all the desires for the actions. That means it's the root for the makifim of the specific makifim of each of the worlds. That's what he just added here. That last line, you see? Hainu leproti arutzenu shebamais. Yeah, because he's talking here the Ratzon of Chochmah, the Ratzon for Chochmah, not the Chochmah itself. The Ratzon for Chochmah. So we have the Ratzon. Okay, so we really have 5 levels, which is exactly the beginning of chapter 71, and Ayin Beis starts. So now we have 5 levels. We have 5 levels here. Level number 1, the first level we're not counting. Oyer Ein Sof. Level number 1 is Baruch Shamar v'Haya Elam, a desire, Ola B'Ritzeinei. You have Bereish Manusa de Malkum. But it's not even revealed to himself yet. It's like Reish Deloyes Yad. Then you have Baruch Hu. That is the interface. In order for it to come to the next level, you need to have to be revealed to himself. It's like Gilim and a Helam. That the Hester, Hu, which was concealed should be revealed. Then comes Boruch, Omer, Ve'esa. In Shaarei Teshuvah is not clear, but from Ayin Beis it's clear it's after the Tzimtzum now. Now that you have this interface of Baruch Hu, it's revealed to himself, so now comes Omer Ve'esa, now it's connected to Asiyah. It has details in it. But it's still a machshava. It hasn't yet decreed it. Then that's like Ak, the Heskim in general Heskim, thrown to Ayin Beis. Then comes Boruch, Gezer Mekayim, level 4, where now he's decreed it. So it's a kiyum b'peil, it's an action. And then comes the Chachma, Boruch, Eisa B'Reish, is the Chachma that's necessary. Both Chachma is created now, and that with Chachma he creates the details of the structure. That's the 5 levels. 2 are before the Tzimtzum and 3 are after, according to Ayin Beis. Here you could technically interpret either way, but obviously with Ayin Beis we go that way. Because here it doesn't say, because then where does Gezer and Mekayim come? After the Tzimtzum. It's mashma, it's before. I'm just trying to read it in the words, because he says, Shir Atzmei B'Kayach. So that's chapter 8 in Shaarei Teshuvah. Now, the thing that's going to be very interesting now is that in the next chapter, he continues with the hemshech of the davening. Baruch merachem ala aretz comes next. Sorry? Yeah, I know that, of course. But the key thing that Ayin Beis does, that he also does later in chapter 10 here, is the connection to the 5 expressions at the end of in Birchas Yetzer.
Oh yeah?
Adenu, Zenu, yeah.
He starts even in chapter 9.
I know, in Ayin Aleph. Ayin Aleph or Ayin Beis? Well, what time is it now?
We should have stopped so early. Huh? Only 10:30.
I have no problem learning chapter 71 maybe now. Now I go back here before we go to the Shaarei Teshuvah. The question is whether we can cover a chapter here, or do we just stop? The whole chapter is about these 5 levels?
Yes. Mankind, dominating, loneliness, impacting loneliness.
It's your call. What do you think we should do?
I think we could stop it.
Okay, let's stop here. We'll stop here. So we did chapter in Shaarei Teshuvah, chapter 8, after doing chapter 7, comparing it to Ayin Beis, chapters 69 and 70.